Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper, current high school coach, teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids, and Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Omari, my guy, as people know by now, we usually start off the show with something non-basketball related. This week, I'm not going to be talking about my kid eating a fruit roll-up out of the trash can or any more Batman talk, but instead, let's give our producer Wes Davenport and his wife Jill some love for purchasing their first home.
Yeah, it was big news, and obviously with all the housing stuff, it's kind of crazy, but I'm sure the fans would appreciate more Bryce being wrong about Batman. Omari, we can just rag on him for a bit here.
Yeah, no, I'm cool with that. You know what? Like, Bryce was, he got way too much support for his Dark Knight take. Like, I was very disappointed that people were ragging on me on Twitter. I'm the one who's right. Bryce, we're the ones who are right. Like, honestly, I hate it that I woke up and everybody's like, oh, Omari, actually, you're wrong. I'm scrolling through the Detroit Bad Boys comments. And that did not go how I expected. But we do have to give you some credit, Wes. You are younger than me. You're younger than Bryce. And you are married and you have a house and you're just lapping this. Well, you're lapping me, I should say, in all the life milestones. So big congrats to you.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Speaking of that, Omari, all of this kind of had me thinking, with you being Detroit's most eligible bachelor right now, when are you going to find yourself a significant other and settle down a little bit?
It's going to be a hot summer, man. It's 2022. I turn 28 in a few weeks. You know, one day I'm going to wake up and my knees are going to be bad, back's going to be bad. I got to enjoy this life while I can still enjoy it. So we'll see. We'll see. One day I'll wake up and I'll be past my prime and maybe then it'll be time to settle down and all that. But not right now. Not right now. It's too early.
Talking to all my sister-in-laws this weekend, and they love this part of the episode. I don't think they listen to the rest of the podcast, but they always listen to the beginning, and they're like, yeah, you need to get some more personal stuff about Omari and his dating life. Like, we would love listening to that. It's like, it's a Pistons podcast. It's not a dating whatever, but I'm sure there's some listeners out there that are interested to know what's going on with Omari's.
Well, you know what? If I ever have any big life updates, I'll make sure I put them on here because it seems like people are pretty intrigued by our personal lives. And I'm just in stasis right now. You know, I'm just in a mode of life where I'm just counting my blessings and, enjoying all life has to offer, if I'm being tied down. So kids, all that stuff could come. We'll figure all that stuff out later.
Plenty young, you got plenty of time. I just had to give you a hard time. Again, shout out to Wes and Jill. Huge milestone. Very happy for them. Very cool. Make sure you guys follow Wes on Twitter too. I know Amari's about to drop all of our stuff, but make sure you give Wes a follow because he's got some great basketball takes as well.
So follow, of course, Motor City Hoops. Follow myself at Omari Sankofa. Follow Freep Sports. And then also follow Wes at The Real West 3. Again, that is The Real West D3, I should say. So we have to add his Twitter handle onto the outline next time so that I'm not hurrying and looking it up on Twitter. Wes, we swear we love you. We always talk about you. It sounds like you're not loved, but we do love you, and we're going to get your Twitter handle on there, man.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into this one. We have a fun exercise here in segment 1, Omari. And this is all about this offseason and improvement from personnel. So players, and we're going to get into some coaches if we have time. So one thing we wanted to make sure everybody understands, we could only guarantee one addition or improvement to a player's skill set. So we can't say 2 or 3 things. We just had to pick one. And it has to be somewhat realistic. So just a couple examples here. We can't give Killian Hayes the ability to shoot like Steph Curry because that just flat out is not going to happen. You can't give Isaiah Stewart into the lob threat that Marvin Bagley III is because, again, that's just not going to happen. So, I mean, some of these maybe you guys won't think are realistic, but we're trying to keep it somewhat realistic with each of these. So we're going to go through the roster. We're not going to hit every player. And again, we are going to hit a couple members of the coaching staff. Omari, I'll let you start. Cade Cunningham, what one big thing would you like him to add to his game this offseason?
So Cade's an interesting one because he already does pretty much everything at least an average level. You could say shooting because I think he only shot 31%, but I think the shot's going to come, even if that's not a big focus for him this offseason. I think he's going to figure that out. So for him, I will go with just tightening his handle a little bit. For a guy who has the ball in his hands as much as he does, a guy who's going to be relied on to carry the offense and score as much as he does. I think he gets ripped up a little bit more than you'd probably like him to. He already has a pretty nice, package as far as his go-to moves. So I think that's something that will come pretty naturally for him. But For me, it's like ball handling, just tightening that up a little bit. And, I think as he tightens that up, it'll help him just from a decision-making, process where he's not getting tied up as often as he does. So that's probably his number one for me.
Yeah, I mean, we are on the same wavelength here. I had 3 things listed. Of course, I'll just choose one, but I had the 3-point shooting. And leading up to this, that was probably my number one for a little while, Omari, but I changed it. I have the turnovers as well, but I actually just put strength. I've kind of bought into this notion as I've watched more Luka Doncic. And I don't want the offense to be as heliocentric as what the Mavs may be around Luka, but I do think the kind of the style of play and how they get stuff done is similar, and think that a stronger Cade Cunningham is just going to be that more effective. I'm not as worried about him becoming more athletic or whatever. I think what he does is going to be amplified if he's stronger and can use that strength. So put on 10 or 15 pounds of muscle this summer, and I would be really happy with how he came back.
And he's already sneaky strong, too. Like, we see him with that shoulder. He can kind of bump guys out the way. So, yeah, if he can add more muscle this summer, it would open things up for him a lot, because I think you wouldn't even have to change his game that much. He's just doing what he's already doing, but it's going to help him finish your contact a little bit better. It'll just add to what he was already doing last season. So 10, 15 pounds of muscle. And I also don't know if when you add that much muscle, if it's all muscle, like some of that's probably going to be just a little bit like non-muscle weight. But even that will help him a lot. He's pretty wiry right now, so that frame can add some more, weight, muscle, whatever you want to call it, for sure.
Absolutely. He can play a little bit more in the mid-post offensively, some stuff that people have talked about, something he did in college. And I think even defensively, I don't know that he's a guy that's going to go guard other teams like Quick, Steph Curry, Trae Young type players. Maybe he can scale down the other way, or scale up, I guess, defensively, and guard some bigger wings if he puts on a little bit of weight, a little bit of muscle. Let's move to the next guy who I think is going to be really interesting. I'm very excited and intrigued to see what you're going to say about this guy, and that's Saddiq Bey. What if you could add one attribute or skill, or improve one attribute or skill, what would it be for Saddiq Bey?
For me, I want to see him finish at the rim a little bit better. He's proven that he can shoot. His percentage dipped a little bit last season, but he had a bigger role, so you sort of anticipate guys are not going to shoot as well in a bigger role. But we know he can shoot. He had so much to his game offensively last season, just getting inside the arc, that I really can't knock him too much for his 2-point percentage not being where you want it, just because he did have to do a lot more really that he's done probably at any point in his career since high school. But his at-rim percentage wasn't quite where you want it to be. And for a guy as big and as strong as him, I think he could definitely be a lot more efficient inside the arc and then the paint. So it's kind of like Cade, where I think that's something that'll come from naturally. He's still kind of putting his full game together. But just the footwork, the ball handling for him, it's just a laundry list of stuff that he could tighten up. And if he can get that at-rim finishing up to about 60%, I think he was around 58, 59 last season. For forwards, it's usually a little bit higher than that. It'll go up a lot. And it's not all his fault either. Like, he was creating a lot of his looks the last season. As the Pistons get more playmaking and shooting around him, he should have easier looks. So I think that'll go up regardless. But that's probably my number one for me for him.
Yeah, I had the same thing. I just had finishing touch around the rim. So I'll talk about my second one, which was actually rebounding. And I think a lot of people are going to, raise their eyebrows at that a little bit. Like, what do you mean? He is a good rebounder. I think he finished the season around 5.5 rebounds a game. But at the very end of the season, I think it tailed off just a little bit. His last double-digit rebounding game was the middle of February. And maybe this is like because I've watched Jeremy Grant for 2 seasons not be the rebounder I wanted him to, and I see Saddiq a little bit more as the 4, and it was something this team struggled with. I just would like to see him up 7-8 rebounds a game. I think that's another thing, along with the scoring and everything else we talk about Saddiq being able to do. If he can become that kind of rebounder, obviously it just adds to his all-around game and what he's contributing.
And Saddiq, he's kind of like Cade, where it's just tough to be too hard on him, because he's already met or exceeded expectations. So it's like, okay, well, this guy was drafted. A lot of people probably thought he'd be a 3-and-D guy, and he scored 51 points against the Orlando Magic. So he's already exceeded a lot of expectations. But if he gets that inside the arc percentage up, then I think that'll get him closer to being a player that, I think we could probably get to if everything goes right for him, which is kind of like that Chris Middleton tier. So number one for me for sure. That, but rebounding is up there as well for me.
Yeah, and Wes drops a little nugget. He did improve by a rebound per game from his rookie season to his sophomore season. So, ideally we see it continue to go up. I mentioned Jeremy Grant. He's the next guy on the list, Omari. Again, this is probably one, my guess is most people are saying a new home for Jeremy Grant is what people want, is they want him to get a new home in a different city. But let's say Jeremy Grant is staying in Detroit. What would you like to see him improve upon?
For him, it's definitely the passing vision. We saw some of that last season, him starting to make those reads, trust his teammates a little bit more as the year went on. And I think it helped him that the ball was in Cade's hands a bit more compared to early in the season. So you don't need Jeremy to be like that kind of like Draymond role at all. But, just if he has the ball, you got an open man in the corner, just being able to hit that skip pass or whatever it is to be able to go a long way for him. So he did improve as a passer last season. And he's already a good shooter. Like, he already gets to the line a lot. For Jeremy, you kind of have to nitpick as well. But if he could become that secondary creator, there's really not a whole lot else you'd be able to knock as far as his game. And if he has that, honestly, maybe the discussion becomes, do you just go ahead and extend him and give him that 24 a year? Because that's a really good contract for a guy who can shoot, get to the line, pretty decent defender, and then keep the ball moving as well. Because right now, that's probably his biggest weakness is making those secondary reads.
Did you see enough post-All-Star break from that trio to make you... I feel like I saw enough that it makes me a little bit intrigued to see him for another half of a season. Like, would you want to see him just say, hey, hold on to Jeremy Grant this offseason and let's see if that trio, what they can do for another half a season and maybe wait and trade him at the All-Star break? I know what fans are going to say. You lose some leverage doing that. I don't know. They look good post-All-Star break when they played together.
I think it would be foolish for the Pistons to not consider it. I think we saw this past trade deadline that they're not going to settle for just any deal. And I don't think they're in a position where they feel like they have to move Jeremy Grant. It's still more so if the value is there, you do it. If the value isn't there, it's not a bad outcome to just hang on to a really good player. With that said, I think you have to extend him this summer if you don't trade him. I think it would be a bad situation to bring him into the season with no extension. And then you're almost incentivized to just take whatever deal is there at the deadline, or else you lose him for nothing next summer. To me, it's either extend or trade, but I don't think bringing him into the season would be smart for the Pistons without an extension.
But as you say, if they give him that extension and then decide the trio doesn't work, or let's say they draft Chet and Chet just explodes onto the scene and you're like, we got to make room to give him minutes. We got to get Jeremy out of here, or Jabari or Paulo, or even Keegan Murray, whoever it is. He is more tradable at that point with the extension because it's still a good contract, don't you think? Like, his value is probably better if you go ahead and have given him the extension.
I think you can make that argument because here's the thing: like $20 million a year for him is probably a slight underpay. Just looking at the way the league's progressed now, you have a lot of guys who on paper are probably in that Jeremy Grant tier of talent, or even a little bit under, and they're making around the same amount he is. So that's a good contract. You pay him extra $4 million a year. That's not outrageous, right? Like, he's not going from 20 to 30. It's a pretty slight raise. So, no, that's not a bad situation at all. And some of that will be dictated, I believe, also by where they pick in the lottery. If you have a top 3 pick, then you know with certainty that you're getting a power forward. So that informs your decision to an extent. If you fall to 4, 5, 6, now that's not as certain because there's really only one power forward in that range who would probably threaten Jeremy Grant's spot. And even that's an if, right? And that guy's Keegan Murray. Is Keegan probably a ready-made player? Like, will he give you good minutes as a rookie? I think so. Is he a day one starter? I'm not certain about that, and I don't know if the Pistons are either, even though I do think they're pretty high on Keegan Murray. So it's pretty fluid, but to me, I feel like if you don't trade Jeremy this summer, you have to extend him.
No, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that, but absolutely that's something that they need to look to do because then you are in a tough situation if you decide by the All-Star break that he's not fitting, or the trade deadline, I guess I should say, and then he's on an expiring contract, and there's all sorts of things that go along with that. Real quick, mine would just be I kind of looked at this from him staying with the team all of next season, it would be embracing his role. This is something I brought up a couple episodes ago that I thought he eventually did with this team. You talked about it playing off of Cade. And so I do think that that's where I would like to see his jump. He kind of is who he is at this point as a player. I'm not going to sit here and harp on the rebounding or, the vision and stuff. I would say embrace the role as the third option or maybe the fourth option or whoever it it ends up being for him. And so that's what I'd love to see from Jeremy Grant.
No doubt. Up next, I believe we have Isaiah Stewart. And there's a few different directions we could go with him. I thought he really showed a lot of promise toward the end of the season. But Bryce, now that you opened up this one, what do you want to see from Isaiah?
Okay, so I have to ask you a question. Where would you consider Isaiah Stewart's rim protection right now? Like, would you say he's an average, good, great, or elite? Like, what category would you put him in just as a rim protector?
I put him in a good category.
Okay.
I think he's I think he's fundamentally sound. You could always get better, but he was certainly their best rim protector last season. I think his advanced numbers for rim protection were pretty good as well.
Okay, so because I don't want to like break our own rules here in terms of jumping him too many tiers in one offseason. So I won't say he turns into an elite rim protector. I'll say he takes one jump and becomes a great rim protector. And I just think if Isaiah Stewart takes a jump as a rim protector with what he does as a switch defender, you have a heck of a defensive player on your hands. And for me, I would rather take that than whatever offensive improvements I think a lot of people would rather have.
No doubt. I think that's a good one. At the end of the day, I think his most valuable trait for his career will be his defense. So, yeah, if he's an elite rim protector and a good, switch guy, could keep up with smaller players, which he already is, it's a really good situation to have. And I've said it before. I think Isaiah is going to be a guy who is good during the regular season, but is irreplaceable during the playoffs just because guys who can do that are irreplaceable in the playoffs. Teams tend to go small, and I don't think you're going to be able to play Isaiah Stewart off of the court. For me, and I'm probably going to say this for a few guys, but this is the three-point shooting. Isaiah, like if the level he is on defense right now, like even if he only gets like 10, 15% better, I think you feel pretty good about that. Offensively, you need a little bit more, and he's already the best screener on the roster, but he's not a great finisher inside.
Other than Luka Garza.
Okay, other than Luka Garza, I'm sure there are fans who thought that. Not even Luka Garza would say that. I think you just need to get a little bit more offensively from Isaiah, and he's not, the best leaper. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who finishes at a high rate at the rim, even if they run more post-ups and whatnot for him, which they could probably get away with doing. Post-ups just earn as high percentage of look as, like lobs and whatnot. And he's not going to be a great lob threat. He's 6'9", not a great jumper. That's not his game. So you really do want to see him space the floor. And he works at the shot all the time. I said it on the pod. I've written it. Like, that's something that he works on. It's something that they intend to be a part of his game, ideally sooner rather than later. It's just doing it in live game action. And we saw the past 2 seasons, he took a lot more threes as the year winded down. His rookie season, he took more but didn't hit a lot. This past season, he took more and actually hit him at a pretty decent clip. So if Isaiah could take 2-3 threes a game, knock him down at least a 34% clip, that would go a long, long, long way toward him just being a plus on both ends of the floor, especially with his screens. I mean, if you could just screen and pop it from all game, like that would be great. You saw the Pistons sign Kelly Olynyk, for that very reason. That's going to be the thing for me with Isaiah until he gets it. It's just improving his outside spacing.
Okay, and I know we're probably going to do some crystal ball stuff once the offseason plays out a little bit more, what we think is going to happen next season. But if I ask you right now, Amari, and I tell you Isaiah Stewart takes 3 3-point attempts a game next year, and I told you had to go over under 35% for the season, where would you put a significant amount of money to you? Where would you put that bet?
Over under 35% next season for Isaiah.
On 3 attempts per game from 3.
I'm going to go under. I think probably realistically first season let's say they give him the green light. He's always had the green light, but let's say they make it a game plan for him to take 2 or 3 a game, for him to go from where he's been to above 35% over the span of an off season. It's doable, but I don't know if I would put money on it. I think if he got like 34%, like just, league average, healthy number to where teams aren't cheating off of him as much, that's probably more realistic for me. So I'm under, but I don't know. Because you asked that, I feel like you want to go over, Bryce.
No, I actually would go under. Like I agree with you. I feel like I'm pretty good at this over-under thing. Maybe I'll get a job. If Freef doesn't hire, maybe Vegas Vegas will hire me. I think 33% is the number, right? If you can get him at 33% on 3 3-point field goal attempts a game, you got to feel pretty good about it. And you're right. Shooting is going to be a thing with a few of these guys here as we continue to go through. The next one up is Killian Hayes. And I'm just going to say real quick, I want the Oklahoma City Thunder game mindset. I realized that wasn't an actual NBA game. It was a G League game. But if you could give me that mindset, regardless of anything else, if you can give me the mindset that Killian Hayes played with in that game, that's what I'll take for 82 games next season.
For sure. So Killian, he did improve a lot finishing at the rim last season. Like as the year went on, and even if you look at his at rim finishing percentage for the entire year, it was actually pretty decent. So that was a really big leap for him in that regard. But again, same with Isaiah, the 3-point shooting. You can't be a sub 30% 3-point shooter as a point guard in the NBA unless you're like a Russell Westbrook level, slasher, and you're just able to get to the rim at will and finish at a high rate. Like Ja Morant, I think he shot like 35% his sophomore year, but he's Ja Morant, right? And even Ja had to get better at it because teams, even in the playoffs we saw today, Golden State,
they played way off of him. Yeah, he made 2, and they still weren't going to guard him. They're just like, go ahead.
Yeah, and Killian, like he has to be able to shoot threes. Like that's just an absolute must for him. Like there's really, I don't see how he becomes a player the Pistons need him to be if he's not shooting at least 34, 35%, every single night. So that's a pretty clear-cut one for me.
All right, Hamidou Diallo. We got 2 more players, and then we're going to do 2 coaches. So we might get through Hami and Marvin Bagley III a little bit quicker. But Hamidou Diallo, what would you like to see him improve, assuming he is back with the Pistons next season?
You can say 3-point shooting for him, but overall, I just want to see him become more disciplined, like more disciplined on defense, more disciplined as a decision maker. He might not ever become a good 3-point shooter, and for the role that he plays, that's not a big deal for me. Like if he does shoot, better than 34% from 3, cool. But he's probably a career energy guy off of the bench, and just need him to be more fundamentally sound. I think he's a little twitchy, a little too, just doesn't always make the play you want to see him make. So just more discipline on defense, more discipline with the ball in his hands, making the right reads, just giving it up if there's no lane available for him. Just lock it down a little bit more on that, I think, will go a long way for him.
No, 100%. That's what you said it better than me. I put off-ball defensive IQ, like I'm in my coach's speak there, but discipline sums it up in one word. That if he was more disciplined, decision-making, I'm not going to repeat everything you said. So I agree 100%. My second one for him, Omari, was the mid-range pull-up. Like he flashed sometimes where I'm like, dang, like if he can really knock this down at a high rate, and I'm the analytics guy here, but I'm not saying he's going to be DeMar DeRozan, but you can't block the shot because he jumps so darn high. So if he could really, really be consistent with that, with everything else he does, all of a sudden you have the makings of a pretty solid offensive game. So that would kind of be the second thing if it wasn't I think the discipline, you hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I honestly don't care whether or not how he develops a 3-point shot, just because, like, that's probably just not his game. Like, he's so quick, so athletic, he's going to blow past most people anyway. And you can get enough spacing around him to kind of mitigate that. So just be the best role player you can be. Don't worry about being a primary guy on offense. Just lock down on discipline and come back, and coach will leave you out there and not have to worry about you making any mistakes. That's number one.
Absolutely. So we're going to pivot here just a little bit. Great idea from Wes. This is why we keep this man around. And we're going to take Marvin Bagley III and the coaches into segment 2, and then we will transition into the free agency conversation. So stay with us as we come back from this break. We'll break down those 3 guys and get to some free agent targets for the Pistons.
I'm Alyssa Robinson for the Detroit Free Press. When you wake up every morning, what's the first thing you do? Check your email? Me too. And when you sign up for our daily briefing newsletter, you'll get all the latest news sent directly to your inbox so you can wake up and be ready for the day. We also have newsletters about COVID-19 in Michigan, the latest entertainment headlines, as well as Woodward 248, a newsletter specifically for people living and working in Southeast Oakland County. And don't forget about automotive headlines and all the latest news from our Michigan sports teams. We have a newsletter for every personality and preference. Just head to freep.com/newsletters to sign up for any one of these great options and more.
So we are back with our offseason breakdowns for Pistons players and coaches. We are only guaranteeing one improvement for each person. What would it be? We're going to lead off with Marvin Bagley III as our final player, and then we'll do a fun one where we're going to do Dwayne Casey for offense and Rex Kalamian for defense. So Marvin, he came in and he kind of is who he is at this point. He's a great inside-the-arc scorer. I feel like there's a long list of things to come back with and be a little bit better at personally. So I'll just let you lead off with that one, Bryce.
I got to go back to you. What would you consider him as a rim protector right now? Like bad, below average, average? Where do we think Marvin Bagley is just as a rim protector? We know the defense is questionable in general.
I would say below average. Like, I think he's got the tools to be better. And he's probably got more upside as a rim protector than as a guy who's going to switch into the perimeter. But, he's a little jumpy. He just doesn't really have the discipline you would want to see from a rim protector. So I think below average right now for sure.
Okay, so perfect. So I put in an average NBA rim protector because I'm fully bought into the offensive game. And I think he brought something. We all saw it. We've talked about it, that this team didn't have, that Cade and Killian need to be playing with. Maybe you end up getting it from somebody else who's better defensively or can stretch the floor. I have a feeling we may hear stretch the floor or 3-point shooting from you, but I would give him average rim protecting. And then maybe you're getting something defensively from Marvin Bagley the third.
Yeah, I mean, I think realistically, that's probably the biggest one. And if you look at something that's more realistic, he can get better at that because there's like an IQ element to it, but you can develop
100%,
that, right?
Yeah.
Like there's just basic things you can do as far as just the discipline of not biting pump fakes, just knowing when to rotate, knowing everybody's assignments and all that.
Yes.
Just spend the entire offseason watching film, understanding the scheme, understanding where guys are going to try to attack you from. And then, when you are matched up, just verticality, right? Hands up, straight up in the air, just a lot of technique and IQ stuff that I think you can get better at. I'm pretty sure Brook Lopez wasn't renowned for his rim protection early in his career, but now he's one of the best, rim protectors in the NBA.
He was really good. He was really good on Sunday in that Bucks Celtics game 1.
Yeah, he and to me, that's sort of a blueprint for what Marvin Bagley can follow. You come into the league, you're a pretty good post guy, but you still have to hold your own on the defensive end as well. As good as Marvin Bagley is as an interior scorer, his plus-minus numbers just aren't that great because the Pistons are giving up numbers when he's on the floor. And it hurts, too, because he's just an awkward fit on defense no matter who you put him next to. He can't really switch that well, so whether you put him next to Kelly or to Isaiah, it's going to be a little awkward either way. So just learn how to stay home, protect the rim, at least become average, and I think it makes things a lot easier for everybody else. So, you could also say shooting from Marvin Bagley, at the very least, if you're not going to be a great defensive guy, just absolutely destroy everybody on offense. Yeah, I think defense is number one. He's got to at least be average at the rim.
Yeah, that was one of my issues with him and Stu playing together was the other team would just put him in all the ball screen situations, and the Pistons were switch everything defense at the end of last season. And so now it wasn't even Stewart as the big guy switching who was pretty good at it. So I kind of had issues with them playing together because of that. But we've talked a lot here in the last minute about the scheme. So let's go ahead and get into that. Rex Kalamian, essentially, I guess you would call the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Pistons. If there could be, we don't even have to say Coach Kalamian, what he needs to get better at, but what would be the one improvement for the defense as a whole or something new or different you would like to see next year?
So the Pistons were very switch happy last season. And I think some of that is just you have a really young team and you don't want to overcomplicate things. They're not competing for a ring, so you could just kind of simplify things. I think the upside to it was you're switching Isaiah Stewart on everything. And, over the course of the season, he got a lot better at it, right? So there's some upside as far as just seeing which guys can handle which assignments. I know there were some fans who hated how much they switched, and even just you see national people tuning in, and they're like, "Why are the Pistons switching so much?" But in the grand scheme, I think it was a big deal. All these guys are 21 years old. You don't want to. The NBA defense is so complicated. I just understand. Let's just make it somewhat easier and see what guys can do, which assignments they can handle. So I get it. But next season, you have a better idea of which guys can have which assignments, right? There's some guys you want to switch, and some guys like Marvin who you probably don't want to switch everything on. So just be more selective in it. If you have Isaiah, by all means, let him handle whatever assignment they throw at him. Probably don't need Cade going, switching everything, right? Because, there's some matchups where he's going to pick up fouls and then, he's sitting a lot of the first half. So just tweak it a little bit. Depends on the personnel on the floor. But you can tighten that up a little bit, I think.
No, I agree. And I went back and watched some film. I think it was when I was doing a Cade Cunningham defensive breakdown, and I was watching some games before All-Star break, maybe right after All-Star break. They weren't good at trying to do multiple things, Amari. They just flat out weren't. And it was a young team that didn't play a lot of games together. And what people have to understand, there's a lot of chemistry that goes into, okay, we're going to switch this ball screen. We're going to drop this. Cade and Sadiq are switching, but Cade and Kojo aren't switching. There's just a lot to that, and they never developed that chemistry. So that's absolutely the big thing for me is, especially in ball screen coverages, I would just like to see some versatility. We're going to drop with this big. We're going to switch with this big. Maybe we blitz this guy And we didn't see a lot of it, and I hope that we do next year as the team grows, everybody gets a year older, maybe they start to develop some chemistry.
And there's probably some opportunities you could take on switches to kind of let guys flex different muscles as well. Like, James Harden is like not the greatest perimeter defender, but in the post, he's really good, right? Like, maybe you can use Sadiq on some switches where he's matched up against bigger guys, but you can trust his strength to be able to, like at least match up and, like he's going to make life a little bit more difficult, right? So, yeah, just be more selective in it. Like, you can kind of play guys to their strengths a little bit. There's some guys you probably don't want to switch everything with. But I think in a vacuum, you can do that, depending on whatever lineup you have out there, and feel pretty good about, Sadiq being in the post against a bigger guy, or Isaiah out against Luka, or whatever guard. So just tighten it up. But I agree. I didn't think it was a big deal last season. These guys are young. NBA defense is hard. Like, whenever you see a perfectly executed, like, defensive stand, which half the time is probably going to fail anyway because NBA players are so good at scoring. But it's always like, man, like, is there so many moving parts you have to account for? Like, that is hard. That is hard. Like, as I've covered the league, and you just really understand how NBA defenses work.
And I think that all ties into what we're going to get to in a minute with free agency. Everybody says, oh, well, Jalen Brunson can't play for the Pistons because they're going to switch everything. Well, maybe they won't switch everything if they bring in Jalen Brunson, and they'll drop coverage with him. Or what? And the other thing is, the Mavs are a top 5, top 8 NBA defense, and Jalen Brunson has played a lot of minutes for them. So they figured out with him, and it's not like Luka is a dog on the defensive end. Here's the other thing I want to say. This, since we're on defense, and I used to be one of these guys before I got into the NBA big, is this whole narrative that dudes don't play defense is insane. It's so complicated. And you try to figure out a scheme to guard these guys. You got these incredible on-ball creators with lob threats and guys that can stroke it from the three-point line. You can't stand in the lane for longer than 2.5 seconds. You can't be, however close to the rim to take a charge. It's really, really hard to play good defense in the NBA. So I'm not saying the effort is always 100%, and I know it ramps up in the playoffs, but let's go easy on the NBA guys don't try on the defensive end. It's really, really tough.
Yeah, I agree. And I tweeted about this during March Madness because, you have people who will say, well, college basketball teams try harder on defense than NBA players. But you're like seeing North Carolina get destroyed by a full court press. And it's like, that's not going to work in the NBA because everybody's too good at passing and scoring, and you just can't afford to have your defense that far away from the rim. Like, you're going to get crushed. Like you saw today, like Giannis had to play, and Grant Williams did his best, but Giannis is 7 feet tall, strongest guy on the court. He just tosses the ball up and dunks it. Like, these guys are freak athletes. It's just some stuff you just can't do anything against it, right? And the rules also skew toward scoring, which I think is better for the good of the game because it's better to watch a 120-118 finish than a 64-63 finish. No disrespect to the 04 Pistons. So, yeah, like, it's just hard. Like, you're not going to shut these guys down. If Jason Tatum's cooking, he's going to score 40 points and nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and whenever you go and double Giannis, then Pat Connaughton and Grayson Allen are knocking down threes. It just... Every college team doesn't have that type of talent. It's why I coach high school basketball, because it's way easier to coach because every other team has a dude who can't shoot. So we just don't guard him and we make the offense play 4-on-5. Like, it just, and in an NBA game, for the most part, you don't. That's why we talk about Killian Hayes being able to shoot threes, right? Because we want the other team's defense to have to be able to guard, or have to guard him, and it creates open space. All right, I'll get off my soapbox. We'll move on to the offensive end. I know I tend to do that. Dwayne Casey. What would you like to see? And it could be from Coach Casey specifically, or just the offense in general next season.
So again, I think it's kind of tough because, the Pistons were in rebuild mode last season. Some of the stuff is just, we're not playing to win. So you're going to be a little bit less judicious, maybe with certain rotations or, the tightness of your scheme, just because, you're trying to get guys opportunities and whatnot. Putting the ball in Cade's hands more the season went on, running more pick and roll. I thought the offense was just like really collegey to begin the season. And it seemed like it was a lot of effort with not much payoff to the amount that they were passing and just trying to find open shots, especially when you can't shoot. I mean, you're doing a lot of passing for guys who are shooting like 29%. But next season, especially if you get a secondary ball handler, like whether that's Brunson or, just simplify things a little bit, honestly. If you use that cap space, you flesh the roster out, you got more shooting, guys like Killian, Sadiq, Isaiah come back and they're better. Honestly, you just run more pick and roll. And I mean, K is so good that you can just probably trust that if you have shooters around him, he's going to make the right play. So just to me, simplify things. Just you have K, he can play, put the ball in his hands, let everything else figure itself out.
Okay, so this is the first time, not first time, first basketball take Omari and I are going to disagree a little bit on. Obviously, we disagreed on the Batman and other things, but I would actually like to see more creativity from the offense next season. Now, some of that does include ball screen stuff. Like I was watching the game on Sunday, and the Warriors come out and they're using Gary Payton II as the screen and roll guy, and he's making short roll plays because they're blitzing Steph Curry. I would like, okay, let's do that with Killian Hayes. See if Killian Hayes can come set a ball screen and short roll and then create out of it. So I would just like to see some more creativity from the offense, do a little bit better job putting the talent in the right places to be successful. And I think part of this too is, okay, if they draft Jabari Smith Jr., you got to be putting that guy in the right spots to get open looks and do what he does best. If you draft Paulo Banchero, I really want to see some creativity because now you got a 6'10 guy that can create. Even Chet, and I know I'm not the biggest Chet guy, but if they're going to draft Chet, you got to be creative offensively with what he can do because you can't just throw it to him on the block and let him get beat up. So that would be my biggest thing, along with I wouldn't hate seeing them push the ball just a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think a lot of it's just like personnel, right? Like you really only had one truly dynamic scorer last season and K. And you could say that about Jeremy as well. He missed most of the season, but just from like a passing standpoint, I think you're a little bit limited with Jeremy to an extent. And, if he's not feeling it, then yeah, maybe he is more of a catch and shoot guy some nights. But yeah, if you get Chet, you get Jabari, you get Paolo, all those guys are, I think, versatile enough to where you can put the ball in their hands more. And well, maybe not Jabari, but especially for Paolo and for Chet, both of those guys could push the break. They have decent vision for bigs. You can placate off the ball a little bit more. And yeah, if you have Brunson or whoever else, it would open the door for like more creative sets. So yeah, I mean, like, I guess I'm in the middle. Like, I think you can simplify things, just like trust K. But yeah, if you do add another high level of a playmaker next to him, that opens the door for a lot. So you see what Dallas does with Luka and Brunson and whatnot. And I think they have a lot of creativity in what they do. So I guess to me, it comes down to the personnel. But if you had a guy like that, then absolutely you can open the door up for a lot more stuff than they did last season.
I think we're kind of down the same page in terms of like you want to see more ball screens, which I agree. I just want to see some creative ball screens. Here's where I'd be disappointed. If they draft Paolo, I want to see the ball in Paolo's hands and Cade Cunningham set a ball screen for him and see what happens. Maybe not just as much as the other way around, but at least a little bit. And then what are you going to do with Sadiq? Does he improve his game? Can you put him as the ball screen guy? Can you run him off a screen on the weak side as this is happening? So I think we're kind of thinking the same wavelength. And again, it's going to come down to who they get in the draft, who they get in free agency. But as with a lot of things, the talent is going to determine what you're able to do, especially on the offensive end.
And they need a talent upgrade in general anyway. So yeah, like Paolo, I thought he looked really good just as a playmaking big last season. And he's not a great shooter. Like, I don't think he's going to come in next season and be a guy who shoots above 35%.
No, he won't.
So absolutely, you would want Cade setting more ball screens in that, respect, because Cade is a pretty good off-ball shooter. He wasn't last season, but I feel pretty confident about him becoming one. And yeah, I mean, I think just having Cade as that chess piece really opens the door for a lot more stuff.
Yeah, again, and that's where I guess when I say creativity, that's what I'm talking about. Just using these guys in some different ways, figuring some stuff out. Yes, we all want to win more next season, but I still think it's a year where you can experiment to an extent and find out what these guys can do. All right, guys, we're going to pivot a little bit again. Well, let's go ahead and take our last break here. And then when we come back, we will fully dive into the free agency names that have been around this team and what Omari and I think about them. And we got a few new ratings, so we're going to read those comments when we first come back.
All right, hey, Carlos, just a quick idea. How about if I say, hey, this is Sean Windsor, and you say, hey, this is Carlos Morales, and I'll go, and then we'll go back. You want to try that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, you ready?
Yep.
Hey, this is Sean Windsor.
And this is Carlos Menares.
And we are the team behind Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean, where we are going to talk about, you guessed it, sports, but lots of other stuff. Like what, Carlos?
Oh, we're going to talk about your favorite subject, Sean, food. Probably more food. Arts, culture, sports, TV, movies, you name it. If it's happened in Detroit, we're going to talk about it.
And sometimes we're going to have guests in who obviously know a lot more than we do about just about everything. But we're going to have some free press journalists to talk about big stories, folks from the sports world. We're going to be out every Thursday. You can find this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts. We hope you'll join us.
All right, everybody. You guys know how much we love getting your feedback on Apple Podcasts, on Twitter, Spotify, wherever you listen. Even Omari was talking about checking out the DBB website. We got a ton of reaction and comments on the Freep website this last episode. So keep that stuff coming and don't think that we aren't checking that stuff. We got 3 new comments. We're going to go through them rather quickly, but we do want to give some love to those of you that reached out. So from Summit Fan says, great Pistons podcast. The Pistons Pulse is definitely my must listen to podcast for Detroit basketball. Omari and Bryce give excellent insights about the Pistons. That's how the team is playing, offseason moves, or draft analysis. I love that they bring respected, well-known guests like David Aldridge and Jeremy Woo. I hope they keep that up. Keep the interesting Pistons topics going and looking forward to listening to the next pod. And then from Rob Mard, Best Pistons Pod, Bryce and Amari bring insight that is unique and not just repeated off Twitter. One request, bring back the quiz game that was on the old Motor City Hoops pod. That was a great segment.
It's funny because we were actually going to do Sheet or Sham this episode, but, we're in full off-season mode, and it was like, is it worth doing an hour and 20-minute pod for Sheet and Sham? We're going to save Sheet and Sham for a rainy day, but it will come back. But again, we love seeing the comments. We love seeing, especially the paragraph comments. I feel like people are really good at, just waxing poetic about how much they enjoy it, and we always look out for it. So again, we appreciate the love, appreciate the support, and definitely excited to continue this off-season content.
Yeah, absolutely. And we truly were talking about bringing Sheet or Sham back. If you guys don't know what we're talking about, it's essentially a true or false game that Wes would lead and then me and Omari would have a competition. I'm sure Wes would skew it in Omari's favor so he could win, but that's just how things go. Right. And Omari, you got the comment sent in the group message before me this week. You beat me to it.
Yeah, I did. Like I said, I always wake up and I check, and I don't always send it, but then you end up sending it, and I'm like, oh, well, I could have sent it because I already saw it. So I'm going to start competing with Bryce to break the new comments in our group chat from here on out.
Absolutely. And then one quick one off Twitter from @StewartDJ. He said, love listening to the Pistons Pulse all the way in Northern Ireland. You and Omari give great insight into all things Pistons, a team that doesn't get a coverage in UK. Got to a game in LCA in 2020 with my bro, probably the only fan over here. It was just cool to hear from somebody, in another country that's listening to us and supporting the Pistons. It's a huge community, a huge fan base, and we love to hear from all of you. So keep those things coming. But Omari, let's get into these free agency names. Let's start with the one that I think probably has drummed up the most attention from the fan base, and that's Jalen Brunson.
No doubt. So his name has been in the rumor mill pretty strongly. In the Pistons, the game plan for them since they got Cade was to pair him with another ball handler. Of course, they started him next to Killian Hayes and Corey Joseph all season. And Dwayne, he's always just preached the merits of having 2 ball handlers. He did it in Toronto with Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet. And that's just the way the NBA is trending now. Like, rarely when you see a team with just one primary guy with the ball in his hands. You look at Milwaukee, they got Drew Holiday and Giannis. Pretty much every contending team has multiple guys who handle the ball. So Pistons are reinventing the wheel. But in a free agency class that is not super strong, especially when you look at the point guards available, Brunson's definitely at the top of the pack to me. You have Colin Sexton as well, but, probably not quite. Just like price-wise, and also, he's restricted, so it's a little bit of a different situation. But I think naturally Brunson probably tops that list for the Pistons. And he's thrived next to Luka. Cade gets Luka comparison a lot. I don't love that comparison for Luka. I think he's more of a traditional point guard type than Luka is. But I think him and Brunson can play together, no question at all. And I think it makes sense why the Pistons are so interested in him.
Well, and that's what's kind of exciting is a guy that has played as that off-ball secondary creator. And then we've also seen in these playoffs him be able to play with the ball in his hands. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I've watched enough Luka Doncic to determine how well he plays off-ball on the offensive end. But I still think Cade can be a good off-ball player. I'm not going to be one of those guys that says, oh, you got to put him off-ball a ton. But I do think the shooting is better than the 31% we saw this past season. And I think it's okay if he plays off ball and if you bring Jalen Brunson in and you let him play on ball just a little bit more, and you can always stagger minutes and those things. So in general, I know when we had David Aldridge on, he said he didn't necessarily love the fit. And we kind of hit him unexpectedly with that. So he would change his mind if he thought about it a little bit more. But you have no concerns really about the fit between Brunson, Cade, and the lineup.
Not really. I think most point guards can fit next to Cade as long as they can shoot. For me, it's kind of hard to see the downside. Maybe you want a bigger guard next to him, Brunson 6'1". But again, if Brunson were like, 6'4", I mean, he's getting a max contract, like 100%. I mean, for a guy his size to shoot 50% overall last season, 37% from three, pretty solid defensively. And also, I mean, Luka missed most of the first round of the playoffs, and Brunson came in and looked really good as more of a primary guy. So there's a lot to like about his game. And Cade, you can fit Cade next to anybody. So for me, if you're going, after who you think that is the best point guard available this summer, that's pretty easily Brunson. And I don't have too many question marks about him and Cade playing together at all. I think that's two high IQ, just very all-around solid players. And maybe the only downside is that neither of them are great athletes.
My thing is, and I bring it up again, the Mavericks were a good defensive team this season. And Luka, you can't tell me Luka is just like crushing it on the defensive end. So Jalen at least is bringing something decent on the defensive end. I feel like if he can at least be a cog in a defensive team and a defensive scheme that is top half of the NBA. So I had some worries too because he's a little bit shorter. But again, the Pistons don't have to switch everything with him. They can drop, they can hedge, they can blitz, like they can switch it up a little bit. And he is a little bit stouter, so it's not like he can't hold up a little bit in some isolated situations. You brought up Colin Sexton. That's another name. I don't know that we've heard reports that have specifically linked him to Detroit, but definitely a name that's out there. And even though he's a restricted free agent, Amari, I feel like Sexton is a guy who you look at that roster and you probably think he's not in the plans. So I think we both would take Brunson over Sexton, but let's say you miss out on Brunson. Real quick, what would you give Brunson? What would you be comfortable giving Brunson going up to sign him as an unrestricted free agent?
What, Jeremy Grant's extension is 24, and that's like good money for him. I'd probably put him in that same category. Okay. Like around 24, 25, probably at the most I would give him. I think once you get beyond that, it gets a little bit more dicey. And I also feel like it's hard to constantly get a read on like what a fair contract is nowadays because the cap goes up every year.
100%.
So, so maybe, I say that, but yeah, in 5 years, you make a 27 a year. Maybe that's a bargain for him. So, I mean, but right now, that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I probably wouldn't want to give him more than what Jeremy's currently getting. Or if you do, probably not a few million more than that. So, like 25 at the most for me. But he plays so well in the playoffs that maybe there's an argument that he does deserve more.
No, and I think that's where I'm at as well. And the reason I like that number, Omari, is kind of what we talked about with Jeremy Grant, is if you sign him to 25 and it doesn't work out for whatever reason, let's say it doesn't fit, you can still trade him because he's on a decent contract. I think that's my biggest fear right now with this offseason. It's not about spending money, Omari. It's about spending money really poorly. If you sign him to $30 million, it freaking better work, or else you're in a tough spot, because if it doesn't work, then you're probably getting bad value in return.
No, I agree. And I defended the Jeremy Grant signing at the time. People thought it was an overpay. But just looking at whatever role players were getting that summer, like Marcus Morris got 16, and he's a good player, but he's not as good as Jeremy Grant. It's like, is this contract tradable? Like, will you be able to trade this contract and get a pretty decent return? And for me, the answer has always been yes, even the day that they signed Jeremy Grant to that deal. Like, to me, he was an above-average shooter, like pretty good defender. Like, for what you're getting for that, like, I don't see how you can't trade that contract. Like, every contender needs a player like Jeremy Grant. So I'm in the same category. I think if Brunson is on a $25 million a year deal, you could trade that. Once you get closer to 30, I don't feel as good about that. So this offseason, regardless of who they get, is just, can you move this contract? That's the biggest thing for me. Can you move it and get a return? If you can't get that, then you're probably in a range where you're hamstringing yourself more than you need to.
Is it still an asset? That's where it's important. It's not about not spending the money. Is that money going to go to an asset who if you're sold, if I was like 100% all in that he was going to fit with the Pistons and he's the ideal fit, like Zach LaVine, I'm fine giving Zach LaVine a lot more money because I think he's an ideal fit next to Cade Cunningham. Now, there's some injury concerns with Zach LaVine. I don't know that he's played like one season where he's played every single game. So for that reason, maybe you don't. But I think that kind of signing would make more sense for that big money. But that's where I'm at with Brunson. If you can get him at the right price, it makes a lot of sense because he could still be an asset.
We did mention Colin Sexton, and he's probably, like, outside of Brunson, he's like the other point guard on the market who, is going to fetch a lot of money this summer. The thing with Sexton, like, okay, so he's obviously a bucket, right? I mean, he averaged, I think, 24 a game last year. He shoots the ball pretty well. You know exactly what you're getting with him. I guess my issue was like he's also 6'1", and also like not that Brunson's one of the best defenders in the NBA, but Sexton is not a good defender at all. And you pair him next to Cade, who you already probably don't want to task too much on defense. And again, it kind of gets into the range of, do you want to pay Sexton what he's going to demand? If you can get Sexton for like 20 a year, like that's a steal, right? 25 a year. I think that's a good contract for him just because of his scoring. Beyond that, you just look at what it would take to pry him away from Cleveland, given that he's a restricted free agent. Is there a team that's going to give him a max deal just because his class as a whole isn't that great? And you know for a fact that his scoring is going to be an asset. To me, Sexton probably doesn't make as much sense to pursue for those reasons.
Yeah, he's not very good defensively, especially off the ball. My biggest thing with him, and I feel pretty comfortable talking about Sexton because not this offseason, obviously, but the one before, I did a whole breakdown on him, have a bunch of notes, watched a bunch of film for a project that ended up not happening. But he's bad off ball, in my opinion, on offense and defense, Amari. And that's why I don't like Sexton for the Pistons is, while I'm okay the ball coming out of Cade's hands sometimes, I don't want it out of his hands as much as it would need to be to get the most out of Sexton because Sexton isn't good off the ball. And then you're kind of, whatever you want to think about Killian Hayes, even if you staggered minutes, now Killian Hayes doesn't have the ball in his hands, even in the second unit, because, maybe Collins getting those minutes. And then defensively on the ball, he had a little bit, but off the ball, it was really, really bad. I think 20 is the number for me with Colin Sexton, Amari. Like, I would not, if they got him for like 15, and I know that's completely unrealistic, I would be, okay, let's do it. Let's do it. We missed out on Jalen Brunson. You get Colin Sexton for 15. That's a great range to take that risk. I just think there's no way that's actually what you get Colin Sexton for.
Yeah, Sexton falls in that range for me, and I feel similar about Miles Bridges as well. I think Russ going to talk about a little bit where if you can get him for the right price, like I'm all for it, but just for a variety of reasons, I think they both have significant fit issues on this roster. And also they're in that young player range where they're probably going to get paid more than they've proven so far, just because of the market and because of how old they are. I feel the same way. And the other thing about Sexton is just him getting hurt this past season as Darius Garland took off. That would have been very valuable information as far as how he plays next to a guard where you actually want the ball to be in his hands because not only can Garland shoot, but he's a great playmaker as well, similar to Cade. Garland's actually a much better shooter than Cade was last season. But just seeing how Sexton could play off of that, we didn't really see it. So there's just not enough data for me to feel comfortable paying him more than, like you said, like 20 or 22 or, whatever the low end of his value is.
Yeah, so Miles Bridges, let's shift positions here. Miles Bridges, for obvious reasons, a lot of Pistons fans are familiar with this name and they've got excited about it. I kind of dove into the numbers. Again, I'll be honest, not catching a ton of Hornets games and watched a bunch of Miles Bridges. So I did go to these are just the base numbers. He's a better 2-point shooter. He's a little bit better of a 3-point shooter that shoots more of them. And he's a better rebounder than Jeremy Grant. Now, the one thing Jeremy Grant does do better is he gets to the free throw line better, at least so far in their careers, than Miles Bridges. The number came out, I don't even know what it is off the top of my head, but it was a huge number for the extension that he was going to be looking for. It made me nervous. And again, Omari, not because I'm scared for the Pistons to spend the money, but if you're going to spend that money on Miles Bridges, you better be darn sure that the next couple jumps are coming in his game over the next 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, the thing with me and Miles is that, he's talented. I mean, he averaged 20 a game. He's a freak athlete. His 2-point percentage was absurd. I mean, he shot 50% overall, 2 straight seasons. So, inside the arc, he's very efficient. His 3-point shooting kind of fell off this past season. He shot 33% on about 6 attempts. So, for the volume he took threes, you'll want to see him shoot a little bit better. And I guess for me, him being a 6'6" forward, shooting 33% from 3, and the Pistons aren't that great of a shooting team to begin with. I just feel like that's an awkward fit. When you have Cade, ball handler X, Sadiq, and Jeremy already on the roster. Even if you trade Jeremy, ideally you end up with a top 3 pick, or if you don't get one, maybe you have Keegan Murray, and it just seems like Miles is an awkward fit for that. 2, he was the 3rd best player on the team that went 500. So to me, that naturally caps his value as well. LaMelo Ball and Terry Rozier to me are the top 2 guys on that team. And Charlotte, they kind of fell off as the season went on. They're a 500 basketball team. He's their 3rd best guy. I just don't know how you justify paying him to be more than 2022 again with Colin Sexton, but he's a third best guy on the 500 team. Like at least with Jeremy, I think you could translate his skill set a little bit better. And also he played for a Denver team that was much better. Like he was like their number 4 guy. Yeah, for me, like I just don't think the money really makes sense for Miles for this roster.
Yeah, so I think the number was 5 years, $173 million. So you're looking at $34 million a year. So for those of you that don't want to pay Jeremy Grant 24, 25, but you're willing to pay Miles Bridges 34, 35, is the difference in production really worth it? And then again, as we talk about assets, if Bridges doesn't hit Omari, you're in big trouble. Like that's a tough contract to trade. And we've seen some of those around the league in the last few years. Now, I still realize he's young and all of those things, and he's probably not going to completely fizzle, but that would be hard for me to stomach if he could actually demand that size of contract.
Yeah, to me, I just think that pushes him completely out of range for the Pistons. So you get him on a good contract, cool, but I just don't feel comfortable paying him max money at all. If you're paying him that contract, you got to feel pretty good about him being a top 3 guy on the championship team. And we didn't see that last season. If you think he can become a above average 3-point shooter in high volume, then yeah, maybe you feel a little bit better about it. But to me, the Pistons have Sadiq Bey. It's Sadiq or Miles to me, and I feel a little bit better about Sadiq because he's going to be extended one day too. So that's something you have to keep in mind as you're throwing out money this summer.
We got time for one more guy. Let's talk DeAndre Ayton. Maybe not the most realistic. I've had people come at me on Twitter about this. Like, what are you guys even debating? There's no chance. Maybe there is no chance. But DeAndre Ayton is a guy, young kid, playing really well in Phoenix, a winning team. Probably doesn't make sense for them to let him leave town, but he is going to become a restricted free agent. He is going to be most likely on the market for a team to make an offer for. What do you think about DeAndre Ayton and possibly something with the Pistons?
So to me, Ayton is a max guy. And he's probably, I mean, you look at the bigs in the NBA, there's probably 7 of them that are max guys. And, I think Ayton's probably like 6 or 7 on that list. But he's good. Like, he's a good defender. He's got great touch around the rim. He's like the second or third best guy for a proven finals team. So if you're throwing out max money, I think Ayton's the guy you probably do that for over a guy like Miles Bridges or Sexton or whoever you think might command that. But again, he's a restricted free agent, and, it's a big deal when Phoenix didn't go ahead and extend him. But I'll still be shocked if Phoenix lets him walk. You have Chris Paul, he's not getting younger, and already seems to be kind of injury prone. Well, Phoenix as a whole is injury prone in the playoffs. I mean, you look at Devin Booker with the hamstring this past week, but it forced Ayton into a bigger role, and he played really well in that role. So just because he's the third offensive option for Phoenix now doesn't mean he couldn't thrive in a bigger role. So offense and defense, yeah, to me, you give him a max deal. I just don't see why Phoenix would let him walk because you're not going to replace him. And he's really important to what they do. Yeah, I know they didn't extend him, but I just don't see why they wouldn't match whatever deal comes his way and leave it at that.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going to match the deal or give him whatever they can offer. It makes sense that they would. It doesn't make any sense for them not to. I don't know. I guess if they fizzled out in the playoffs, and I don't know what they would do, but you got to keep a 23-year-old big man that's as good as he is. I don't know why I hesitate about giving him the max. Like, I just have a hard time with it, but he's a guy I would have to watch more. But it sounds like he's the type of player you would want to give that kind of commitment to. So I got to ask you this before we go. Let's just say, let's play the hypothetical. DeAndre Ayton would come to Detroit. Jalen Brunson would come to Detroit. If you had your pick, completely different players, play completely different positions. Let's say Brunson's on the $25 million a year contract. Ayton, you got to give the max, which is going to be in the 30s. Which guy, if you're Troy Weaver, are you inking to a deal?
I would go Ayton because there are more good ball handlers than good centers. And I think just from a value standpoint, Ayton would always be a guy you'd be able to trade if you needed to. Just because, again, for what he gives you on offense and defense, there's probably 5-6 centers in the NBA who are, quote unquote, more valuable than that. So I think just like long-term value of that deal, it's hard for me to see how maxing out Ayton, even if he's not quite a max guy, it's still hard for me to see how you would regret doing that just because of the scarcity of truly above average to elite centers in the league. And he's still young as well, right? Like he's 23, 24
I think
years
he's 23,
old. So,
yeah.
Yeah, so for me, that would be Ayton. Don't knock on Brunson, like 25 a year for Brunson, I think would be a really fair contract. But I just think it's easier to get a above average point guard than an above average center.
And I think we're both out on Sexton and Bridges at the numbers that we've discussed.
Yes, absolutely. Like, still have conversations, still suss it out. But to me, those guys are probably just going to get more money than they'll probably be able to live up to. No fault to them. That's not the NBA structured, but I would not give either of those guys the money that they're probably going to get this summer.
Agreed. And I think that's where I'm at with Brunson and that $20 million. I've talked myself more into that as I've watched more of him. And again, like, it makes me a little nervous given Ayton the max, but I think it would be the smart decision to make if obviously he was willing to take it. Perfect offseason for you and Wes is DeAndre Ayton and draft Chet Holmgren, right? Like, get your two guys.
If they draft Chet, like at that point, I wouldn't even draft or go for another center in free agency, because I feel like I'm higher on Chet than many. My mock draft has the Pistons taking Chet first overall, actually. So I do think Chet, if everything breaks right, he'll be another one of those big men who will be like a max level guy, just because offensively and defensively, what you're getting, you can kind of both hands number of guys who can equal that. So if you draft Chet, I would pass on Ayton altogether. But otherwise, yeah, I would say that for sure. If you get Chet or Ayton, then that's a great offseason.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think that's what we didn't talk about it for this reason as we went throughout the episode, but I think the draft is going to determine a lot of what you do in free agency. Because in my opinion, if you draft Paolo Banchero, he's your secondary creator. I don't know that you want a very ball-dominant guy now next to Cade Cunningham. I'd rather have like a 3-and-D type guard next to Cade Cunningham. And so I think who you land is going to end up dictating some of those things.
The lottery May 17th, a lot of things for the front office will click into place after that, because they'll be able to have a much better idea of what they should and should not prioritize. But it just helps that all three of the top guys in this draft are power forwards. So that really simplifies things for Detroit.
Absolutely. That's all we got time for on this episode of the Pistons Pulse. It's going to be an exciting offseason for the Pistons, an exciting couple weeks with the NBA draft lottery coming up on May 17th, the draft and free agency to start not long, a month and a half after that, and we'll really get a chance to see what our Pistons roster is going to look like next season. Omari, my friend, take us home.
No doubt. Special thanks to everybody who helps us produce a pod every week. Kerry Jeter II, our editor, Anjanette Delgado, our executive producer, and also Kirkland Crawford, our other executive producer and my sports editor. Also, shout out to Wes, who keeps us in line, puts the outlines together every week, and recently bought a house, which is a huge milestone. So congrats to you and Jill. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll check in next week.